Welcome everyone to our live event. This is an event that we tend to do once a month, if not more. But this is a live streaming event across multiple platforms, including LinkedIn Live, YouTube, and also through the KP Ready Co's Catalyst platform. If you're not familiar with the Catalyst platform, and if you're not already a member, you should head over to kpready.co to learn more about this, and you'll never miss any of these live events. So today we do have an exciting topic. This is something that we probably don't talk about enough within our industry. When we think about innovation, we think about the things that kind of make us more productive in our work days and in our projects. We tend to focus on technology, artificial intelligence, platforms, tools, et cetera. Today, it's going to be an exciting conversation because we're going to be focused on trucks and cars. And these are trucks and cars that we use every day in our projects. So when you start thinking about fleet and fleet management, it's a pretty exciting thing to start thinking about because it's not something that is a topic when innovation comes up, when we think about how we manage our business. So today joining us is Drew Walker. Drew Walker is the head of fleet sales for Slate Auto. And he understands commercial fleet owners and what they're looking for. He's leading the effort to deliver high value to operators throughout America and to provide low cost, customizable, and reliable EV solutions. Prior to Slate, Drew played an integral role with helping launch the Ford Pro, the commercial-focused e-Transit product, and the F-150 Lightning Pro. So Drew also holds an engineering and MBA degrees from MIT and Tufts University. So we do welcome him here today. Drew, thanks for joining us today. And I think this is going to be a pretty exciting topic for us.
Yeah, thanks, Frank. Really appreciate you guys including me and looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we were sitting in the green room or the digital green room before this, and we were kind of talking about the evolution of fleet, right? So you go back to the concept of telematics. One of those things that has evolved is that these vehicles in general, both consumer and commercial vehicles, have gotten more connected. So when you're starting to look at, in 2025, there seems to be plenty of these new automotive startups, right? You're getting away from your traditional big three, Ford, Chrysler, Dodge, Chevy. What really makes Slate stand out? Like, tell us a little bit more about Slate Auto. What are you guys trying to do? Where are you being disruptive? And just give us a little bit of background on kind of where you are and what Slate does.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the intro there. Slate was founded about 3 years ago in secret inside of a parent company at the time called Rebuild Manufacturing. Really, the original concept was around how do we create the most affordable vehicle, really for kind of the consumer, American consumer first and foremost, where the average new car price is about $50,000 today, and most Americans can't afford a new car. And it wasn't like that 25, 30 years ago when our founders were growing up and had more basic vehicles at that time. And so the company was really founded on this notion of how do we deliver something that's radically affordable for consumers, but also radically affordable for commercial use and for fleets as well. And much of the trend in the industry has been towards the smartphone on wheels. I think that's especially for EVs. That's become the sort of phrase that's thrown around with bigger screens, self-driving technologies, subscription services, all these types of things. Our approach is basically the exact opposite of that. So rather than trying to infuse all that tech in and as an OEM kind of forcing that on consumers, we basically took everything out of the car that wasn't a car. And so you won't find a big screen in the vehicle. You won't find a modem. You won't find some of those items that are in other vehicles. And the reason for that is ultimately not everybody values and wants those things. And we're trying to deliver the most possible sort of economic value. So having the best, price and best capability, versatility, and safety for fleets that are really their foundational requirements for a work vehicle. Yeah. We've also taken a very kind of customizable approach. So although the base vehicle is one that's very stripped down with roll-up windows. In fact, it's designed in a way that's very modular, so you can add back in very specific accessories that we're developing, truck equipment, and mount it on the truck in an easy way that lets you customize it to the exact specifications you need.
Well, it's interesting is that kind of, in my mind, I look at that and it seems like that is the complete opposite of what you would see the traditional big four OEMs do, right? They try to create one vehicle with a guessing on the features that everyone would want, and hoping that they're going to sell. That custom build. I think Tesla did that originally. Like, you can go in and you basically pick what you want, and then they build it and they deliver it to you. I have not seen that on the commercial side, right? Where it's usually you get something that's so bare bones, dial radio, roll down windows, nothing else. But it seems like what Slate's doing is that it's giving you that opportunity to say, no, I do need this feature, that feature, these things, and kind of build it from there. So when you think about that, it's a completely different model. So from that perspective, are these things really kind of more built to order? So if I come in say, hey, listen, I need 6 pickup trucks that have these features, it's being built from that perspective?
Yeah, great question. So yeah, our model is very, very different in that typically you've got sort of your factory output, which can have many different combinations, configurations, and then that ships to potentially other third-party equipment providers that mount things on the truck, and it's sort of a multi-stage process that doesn't really talk together very well. And there's a lot of complexity in that overall supply chain. So
it's interesting. Yeah, what to feed off of that for a second, though, what's interesting is when I worked for an A firm here in Atlanta, we would buy a base truck, and then the truck would immediately have to go back out to then have safety lights and flashing lights and all these other things that didn't come with the truck originally. So I have to go in, I have to go buy the truck, I buy it from a dealer, take it back, and then automatically then I got to have someone come in and install the telematics. I have to have someone come in then and install the lights, the flash, like all these different things. So by the time I procure the truck and get the truck into service within there, there's a longer lead time. It seems like that your model seems to kind of shorten that.
Yeah, that's our aim. We are manufacturing the truck basically in one flavor. It's the Slate truck.
Yeah.
We've got a bigger battery and a small battery, but that's it. There's no options, there's no trim. All of the customization is through accessories, and we're building this very large accessories portfolio as well to kind of go plug and play into the truck. And so rather than putting a lot of complexity, in the plant, building to stock, pushing it out, it's really kind of a almost a just-in-time customization, sort of
made to order
to the customer, effectively made to order, but done in a distributed way, because of the modularity and accessories approach. And so through our distribution model, we'll be able to, specifically for fleets, deliver basically a turnkey, upfitted, accessorized vehicle that even can have a custom wrap design for the truck that has the company's brand on the side, without having to necessarily ship it to another vendor and add complexity to the process.
Yeah, I mean, to me that's pretty amazing, right? So kind of shifting gears slightly, right? So, want to hear a little bit more from you around just this concept of EV fleets, right? I know that from a consumer perspective, EVs have really kind of taken off in the last several years. Wouldn't say necessarily completely mainstream, but you're finding that more manufacturers are producing cars, and you're seeing more of them on the road. So from your perspective, or at least Slate's perspective, if I'm an owner and and I manage, say, 20, 30, 40 trucks, what are the biggest misconceptions around introducing EV into my fleet? And, are there pros and cons to some of that? But particularly around the misconceptions, what do you hear when you talk to folks?
Yeah, I would say, the biggest concern that folks have is always around, charging and range. That's number one. And so, different aspects of that can really help unlock the fit for EVs. Really understanding what your vehicles are actually doing, what your real, call it like first principles needs are, like how many miles are you actually driving? How are you actually filling it with stuff? Not, not your expectation or your conception of that, but what are the actual, needs on the ground? And that really
Mhm.
can help drive whether or not, any EV is the right fit to basically replace a gas vehicle down the road.
Mhm.
Many perceive that they need, 300, 400, 500, 600 miles of range on their battery to, be a good fit for their
Right.
application. But the fact of the matter
Mhm.
is, most fleet trucks, are driving less than 100 miles a day, and
Right.
really don't need that level of capability. At the end of the day, you're
Mhm.
basically, wasting truck payload, and you're spending a lot of money on very big batteries that you really
Mhm.
never use.
Right.
Not to say that there aren't examples of people driving really long distances,
Mhm.
towing very heavy loads over long distances. Those, certainly exist, right? So
Right.
those are the examples that EV is going to be tough. But
Mhm.
for the vast majority, especially for light duty truck applications, you don't really
Yeah.
need that. And it's really a matter of charging anxiety. So what's your charge
Yeah.
plan? Can a driver charge it at their house? Can you put in some chargers at your job site or at your commercial depot? And really solving for
Mhm.
that first, as well
Right.
as just getting comfortable with the public charging infrastructure that's out there. It's getting better and better every day.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. So, if you are on the heavy C side, the construction side, and you are, towing heavy equipment, you have specialty vehicles to kind of deal with that. But if you can, in my head, I think, could you replace 30, 40, 50% of your fleet because most of them are driving pickup trucks or SUVs or something that's a light vehicle, like you mentioned. I think that's good. So, one of the things too is like, people hear the word customization, right? And then, kind of, sometimes it's a little synonymous with expensive. Right? Like if it's truly custom, does it cost more? What are your like where do you see that from, balancing the customization with say efficiency and the scalability, right? So everyone wants custom. I'd love to have a custom bespoke suit or a custom car. But to get those things, those tend to cost more. How does
Mhm.
Slate kind of focus on balancing both the cost efficiency and also scale? Like if you have a firm that's has 100 vehicles, is it cost effective to have that kind of customization?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And we think about customization through the lens of our accessories portfolio and through our basically exterior wrap capabilities. And so, Slate's launching with 100 accessories for the truck. All your major truck categories: slides, caps, roof racks, bed steps, various organization lights, things like that. And we continue to look at additional items that we're hearing from a lot of our sort of early fleet hand raisers, early customers that say, hey, most of my fleets have a roof mounted ladder rack. We really need you to solve for that.
Mhm.
Great. And
Yeah.
we're hearing a lot of the same needs over and over from a lot of the fleets
Mhm.
we're speaking to. So fact of the matter is, probably about 80% of needs are covered from about 20% of the accessories out there.
Right.
And so we're looking to kind of solve for those, most recurring sort of common asks,
Mhm.
toolboxes, slides, these types of things, as sort of standard offerings from us. And so you'll be able to pair any of our accessories together, get them installed on the truck through our distribution partnerships,
Mhm.
and have it show up ready to go.
Yeah.
Um, and certainly that applies for exterior wraps as well. And the way that we're basically going into the wrap business,
Mhm.
developing kits, printing, and installing those on trucks too. Um, and then
Yeah.
certainly if someone needs something very truly bespoke, like if you truly, truly need something bespoke, we'll have
Mhm.
other, partners that we'll obviously work with that can do that type of true customization work. But we
Yeah.
feel that we're going to solve for the majority of the needs out there with some standard
Mhm.
offerings that are not crazy affordable because we're
Yeah.
developing them in a way that mounts easily to the truck, does not take a lot of labor time to do, is efficient and a part of our distribution process. And so a lot of that inefficiency, labor costs will come out through the way that we're building up the portfolio.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad that you touched on the wraps. That is a very interesting concept, right? Because again, go back to what I was saying earlier, right? We would procure the truck, the truck would have to come in, we would have to send it out to, a vehicle wrapping specialist has to come back, and then the lights have to be mounted. And so you realize that it takes several weeks, just to get the vehicle operational. And, we bought the vehicle, we're leasing the vehicle. And then, the way we make money on it is actually getting the vehicle on the projects, right? So there's that. So that how do we eliminate that gap? So that is interesting. So, you start thinking about that, right? The savings of time to market to get the vehicle into service where you can actually start billing against it. Fuel cost savings. There's a variety of things that I see from that efficiency, cost efficiency, and scalable perspective that would be very beneficial. And I do agree with your one point earlier. Yeah, most vehicles are around projects, and they tend to be localized to where, yes, there are some people that do drive great distances, depending on, different parts of the country. But if you're in a major metropolitan area like Atlanta or San Francisco or something along those lines, your projects are most likely kind of a little isolated to the market that you're in, which is fascinating. So when you think about like your vehicle lineup, where do you see the vehicles having the most impact, say, for the AEC industry? When you think about that, like obviously, in my head, I immediately start thinking about site supervisors. I start thinking about survey crews. But do you have any specific use cases or anyone that you're working with today and maybe some examples of how others are kind of deploying your vehicles? I'm guessing that it's very similar to how they're deploying a traditional gas vehicle.
Yeah, 100%. We certainly are in talks and have some very good interest from folks across AEC industry. And you are calling out the main use cases, right? I mean, it is kind of supervisory, it's engineering, site survey, supervisory applications. Primarily is kind of the light duty fit. Slate truck's probably not going to be towing, a big, huge trailer to a job site, but you're probably going to drop that off and leave it there for a while. And so most of the time, you're not actually necessarily moving that asset. So there's actually an opportunity to have more specialized tow vehicles and then non-tow vehicles within the fleet and sort of optimize the cost profile, as well as the sustainability element here. Many construction firms and others have their own sustainability goals. Their clients have them. If it's a LEED certified type of project, being able to claim that you're just electrifying your fleet and reducing emissions towards that project, that's a really strong benefit to be able to advocate as you're basically bidding for those types of projects as well. Right. And with a Slate truck that's super affordable, it's a lot easier to start biting off those electrification goals when the truck's starting in the mid-20s versus potentially $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a pop. And so in terms of starting down that path, it's a lot easier to make that switch with a Slate, we feel.
Yeah, and if you've ever shopped for a pickup truck of late, never did I'd ever think that you'd see $100,000 pickup truck, right? And they're out there, and even more. So you start getting into some of those heavy duty. You see them on the roads today. They're quite expensive. So I mean that price point is actually quite appealing. I think that from that perspective, right? So when you think about our industry, we are very cost conscious, right? Everything for us is we always looking at overhead. How much are we spending on projects and how much are we making back? And so every dollar that you're spending on fuel and maintenance and even the purchase of the vehicle and the equipment itself, does eat away at profit and margin, which with most industries, but in our industry in particular, they tend to be hyper focused on how do we maintain our overhead, which I think is something that's super important. I think between that. So thinking about your vehicle lineup, are you guys right now? Like, is it really just on road? Are you looking at some off-road options? Like, what are again, not like I'm going to go to Moab and climb a mountain type of off-road. But, in the AAC industry, sometimes we're focused on environmental projects and things where the roads are not paved necessarily yet. What does the vehicle lineup look like at Slate when it comes to those kinds of options?
Yeah. Yeah, great question. Yeah, the base truck has about a 9-inch ground clearance, and we are doing basically an upgraded wheel and lift kit, basically accessory. So if there is a little bit more off-road, capability for jumping curbs and, getting through different types of ground cover and things like that, that capability will be there. We are launching with a rear wheel drive, and we're looking at an all wheel drive as a follow on action, but no specific announcements on that yet.
Gotcha.
Recognizing, certainly in many cases, that the muddy and dirty terrain, and that might be something that folks are looking for. But we
Yeah.
do find with the weight distribution on our vehicle, that really helps with the performance in that type of inclement road condition, and then sort of the very fine-tuned control that you get from an EV, and that responsiveness also helps with
Mhm.
performance in sort of low slip or high slip conditions. And so
Right.
we're kind of evaluating and developing kind of the
Mhm.
capabilities in that space, but we do recognize that that's a huge one, and we are building
Yeah.
towards that.
Yeah. No, that's great. So that, that's that's again, it's they're not like they're doing heavy off-roading, mudding. It's, sometimes they're just on a job site that's, just starting to move dirt. So you want to make sure you get the vehicle in and out, which I
Sure.
think would be important. But the ground clearance is one of the key ones there. So let's kind of, this is another big thing because again, goes back to when I think about, fleet and equipment, right? We have to start thinking about operations and maintenance, right? So obviously, in a traditional vehicle, you have traditional maintenance, right? Oil changes and other mechanical things. And obviously, one of the big appeals, like you've heard this a lot with on the consumer side, is you have less maintenance. Um, Give me your insight or your thoughts, like when you think about the Slate truck, what is the maintenance of a Slate vehicle versus, more of a traditional fleet vehicle that's using traditional fuels like gas?
Yeah, good question. Um, like all EVs, right? The lack of spark plugs, oil changes, oil filters, many fewer moving parts.
Hmm.
The Slate truck is going to have, under 500 parts in the vehicle. For a typical, gas truck, it's usually 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 individual end item parts. And so you just have a lot less moving things that can easily break. And then specifically for Slate, though, because it is kind of a back to basics, more mechanical, simplistic kind of vehicle, it's even designed for even further reliability in that sense. There's
Hmm.
no technology screen that's going to crack or software that goes out of date. And so that kind of further helps with the sort of long-term durability. But
Yeah.
eventually everything's going to need some amount of maintenance. And Slate Truck is actually designed even for consumers to do DIY maintenance on it.
Right.
And so there is no all of the information to maintain the vehicle is going to be free and publicly available online. We'll be making announcements soon about our service partnerships, so I will save that for a future announcement.
Yeah.
But trust that the nature of the vehicle being sort of a back to basics approach and designed for simplicity and durability, and with the consumer DIY North Star, it just
Right.
lends itself to easy to maintain, easy to keep it running.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think, that's one of the things you don't think about when you start going into this. I work for a firm that was pretty small, about 130, 135 people. We had over 20 vehicles, and all those vehicles needed maintenance in some form or fashion. Emissions inspections and spark plugs and oil and all these fluids that you don't tend to see on the EV side, which I think is, again, goes back to the concept of, we're very cost conscious in this industry in terms of profitability and looking at margins and every dollar saved again could really, move back towards the bottom line, which I think is interesting. So,
Mhm.
kind of building off of the concept of operations and maintenance, um, obviously the vehicle I'm assuming it is connected in some way, right? So from a predictive maintenance perspective, so you have like a fleet manager that's managing all these vehicles. How are they aware, or what does the vehicle do in terms of being able to provide information? And I'd like to
Hmm.
also build off of that a little bit around, one of the big pillars in our industry is around safety.
Hmm.
Understanding driver behavior, hard braking, all of these things that the traditional telematics would provide. Does
Hmm.
Slate do anything in this space? Tell us a little bit about kind of I know that you say it's kind of dumbed down in terms of it doesn't have a screen. I'm assuming that there is a little bit of technology built into the car though.
Yeah, it's an interesting approach. We don't have a modem built into the car, but we have a couple of different data ports that allow different devices to push and pull data from the car.
Mhm.
To start, we will have a Slate app for the truck that will have capabilities to do software
Mhm.
updates, pull information from the vehicle, push it to the vehicle, and acts as kind of a companion experience
Yeah.
for when you drive, and actually can actively talk to the vehicle to push software into the car. And so that will provide, a layer of insight in terms of truck diagnostic codes and error codes that come up,
Yep.
issues that crop up with the vehicle, and we're still building out what that means.
Mhm. Yeah.
And then we also will have an OBD2 port, which is kind of the classic way that telematics devices are mounted and installed in the vehicle.
Yeah.
That signal set that we're providing to that port is going to be, consistent with industry standards for EVs. And we're working with various telematics vendors now on evaluating and testing to make sure that there are different types of plug-in devices can read the vehicle data and stream it back into their respective platforms.
Mhm.
Fleet customers are typically not looking for a telematics software solution from the OEM. They buy from multiple OEMs. They don't want a
Right.
different software tool for every single vehicle that's in the fleet. They need a multi-make solution.
Yeah.
And so we haven't prioritized building a fleet telematics platform, but rather focused on how do we extract data from the vehicle and make sure that flows neatly into the tools that fleet managers are using today.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's good. It also kind of, I'd be remiss, being an innovation guy, um, you know, without reading tea leaves or exposing your product roadmap. Where does AI fall in this? When you start thinking, obviously, because that's like a big question. Heck, I bought a new TV recently, and apparently I have something called AI sound. Don't really know what it does, but there's AI sound, right? So when you start thinking about that, does AI play a role in this? And in some ways, I think yes, and in other ways, I don't. Right? Like,
Yeah, it's a
what are
good
your thoughts around
question.
that? Yeah,
Yeah, I don't know if I have a good answer for you yet. We certainly,
that's
are
good.
kind of focused on back to basics and not
Mhm.
necessarily chasing the buzzwords on new exciting trends. Of course, as a
Mhm.
company, we're using it internally for all kinds of different
Right.
efficiencies and things. What it means for our products and our customers, I guess I probably can't say too much on that yet. But we're open to learning and finding ways to create more value using it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, it's funny. It's I spend a lot of time on the innovation side. So for me, it's just if I don't ask the question, it kind of feels weird. So
Well, check that box. I understand.
I always got to throw the AI question in there at some point. Um, so let's take this back to the business owner now, right? So I think we've had a great conversation just about the product, its capabilities, its applicability. I think all of that makes sense from your perspective, because I know that you're on the front end on the selling side of this. What size fleets do you think firms like is it really geared towards firms that have a smaller fleet size? Is it something that's more mid? What's your perspective on that? Who like if I'm a business owner, when should I start seriously considering thinking about say like a Slate Auto type product or an EV type product?
Yeah. Um, we certainly are getting, good interest kind of across the broad spectrum. Generally, large corporations are often, have more sustainability goals. They might have deeper pockets to go buy, expensive vehicles. And as you kind of move towards, smaller firms, they, may or may not have those same types of mandates coming towards them. And the dollars and cents, mean even more, I think, in many of those cases, especially just at the pure acquisition side. And so we do see a very strong pull from sort of the medium-sized fleet, the contractor fleet, the truck and van, operators out there, both in AEC, but also various services businesses out there. And so we think that this is going to be a really exciting proposition for them, especially considering, that we're going to have basically a integrated kind of accessorization upfit experience to kind of just streamline that overall. We are selling direct to consumer. We are the dealer, and so we're helping sort of put that deal together in a sense on customers' behalf. But in terms of consideration timeline, vehicles are available end of next year. First deliveries are about a little over a year from that right now. And we've been taking reservations. There is a process on our website that has a, hey, I'm a fleet checkbox. And so we're seeing that demand come through as well, which is great. And so that's really kind of the way to get in line and be first to be, invited to order, sometime early next year and work towards, those first deliveries late next year.
Yeah, and sustainability and environmental issues within the AEC industry, it tends to be top of mind with a good number of firms, particularly if the firms are focused, if they're an environmental engineering firm or water resources firm, they tend to want and talk about these environmental and sustainability concerns. Because we talk about, we start talking about, say, AI, and everyone's like, AI is great, but like, what is it doing to the environment because we're building all these data centers? And then the companies that are building the data centers are like, no, we're building data centers. so they go back and forth. So I do see that. So what would be your recommendation for a firm then to kind of think about, what's the first step that should they do, or what should they be thinking about if they're serious about wanting to at least starting to introduce a Slate product into their fleet lineup?
Yeah, I would say to start, the first step is thinking about a charging strategy, especially if there's a need to put in, a number of chargers or some infrastructure, at a owned facility or leased facility. That can, as these firms know, that can be a long project, right? Maybe best positioned to do it themselves. But certainly that, is kind of foundational to successful EV deployments in general. Having a viable kind of level 2 overnight charging solution, be it at an employee's home. There are, solutions around, home installation and reimbursement for drivers, as well as, owned infrastructure at facilities. So that's kind of the first step, is say, how would we charge these EVs? Can we send them home with drivers? Can we charge them wherever, if we have a yard that we park the vehicles at? So starts there. And then the second layer is then that sort of first principles look at, if we have telematics, how far are we driving a day? Or at least go look at the odometer. How many miles did we drive last year? What does that say for how many miles a day are we driving? If we're doing 20,000 miles a year, that might be a lot for certain vehicles. And if it's 10,000 miles a year, that might be, just right in the sweet spot. So it's also identify what are the low-hanging fruit in terms of regions, markets, vehicle use cases that, most naturally fit into an EV duty cycle. And then as you get comfortable with that, then start, pushing the envelope more and more, getting comfortable with public charging, et cetera, et cetera. So really it's the charging infrastructure first, and then identifying, which vehicles in the fleet are best suited, and starting with the easy wins, and then moving towards, more challenging use cases. And then the last piece is also the drivers themselves, right? Who are going to be your champions? Who are going to help you drive the change management internally to the fleet? Who are the early adopters and willing to do something different and try a new technology that can then be an advocate and an influencer, for the rest of the team and staff.
Yeah. I do find it interesting, depending on the job site. There's also on-site power too. So you start thinking about, there's other equipment and other needs on site typically that requires power. So I do think from a charging perspective that there's, obviously the things that you've outlined, which make total sense, right? But there are other options, I think, too, when you start thinking about the AEC space that in some instances, particularly depending on the job site, there may be other pieces there. One of the things that I start thinking about is, from a scale perspective, um, you know, how does this scale over time, right? When you start thinking about, obviously you're going to have your early adopters and eventually you're going to move into more of the mainstream. What's Slate's thoughts or vision in terms of scale? Like, you know, obviously you guys are trying to carve out a very unique position in the marketplace with the customizable type solutions, the lower cost solutions, which by the way seems to be like you said, the complete opposite that most it seems like even the cheap cars now are over $20,000, right? Like you can go back. I remember back in the day, you go and buy a Honda Civic or a Toyota Corolla for $12,000. Now you can't find it for 20 or 25,000. It's interesting on how that's changed. So how do you see this scaling, from early adopters to more mainstream, say over the next, say 3, 5, 10 years?
Yeah. Yeah, great question. Fortunately, Slate is going to market both to, consumers, as well as to fleets, and the buying patterns and adoption curves of those different personas are different. With
Hmm.
retail consumers, folks are excited. They want to be right at the front of the line. You've got your early adopters that are following us closely and are ready to
Yeah.
jump in, and we love that and we're excited. There are fleets that are that way as well, but in many cases, folks want to buy a few, test, try, pilot, and if it goes well, buy more. If it goes well, buy more. And so it's kind of
Mhm.
an exponential growth opportunity with fleet over time,
Yeah.
or perhaps more of an S curve kind of growth, I suppose.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
and so those two kind of play off each other, though, where consumers see Slate commercial vehicles driving around and see them, and they feel like they're all around town. That also creates visibility on the consumer side. So
Right.
there's an interplay there, especially in the sort of pickup truck space, where, well, if these contractors and fleets think it's tough and a good vehicle, then consumers think that
Mhm.
that's tough enough for them. And so it kind of has this reciprocal effect between the different customer bases. But we're
Yeah.
building substantial capacity at our Indiana plant, to produce eventually over six-figure volumes per year, and looking at both the new sales industry, but also
Mhm.
the used sales in the United States, thinking about the price point competing with
Right.
used. That actually the market size is actually substantially larger than what typically the industry is looking at. And many small businesses are buying used vehicles, used trucks, and
Mhm.
things like that. That gets totally overlooked because, just OEMs that know new sales, and that's kind of where they're staring. But when you're,
Mhm.
in the 20s and you have all these other operational cost savings, your TCO profile is actually more like a reliable used vehicle in most cases. And so
Right.
that just kind of opens up a whole other set of customers for us.
Yeah, I think the pandemic kind of turned the whole used car market up on its head a little bit. It was a little crazy for a while. Like just some used vehicles were even more expensive than new vehicles if you could find them, which I kind of found kind of interesting. But you just kind of wonder where that kind of evolves. Um, going forward. I do like what I really do like about the concept, or at least the model that you're going at after, is that it is it's call it lower cost, but it's the reasonably priced, customized solution that I think most of what I would see from the AEC perspective that they want, right? I don't want to pay for things that I don't need, but I need a truck to be functional in a certain particular way. So when you think about that, I'm an owner. I'm sitting here. We've covered a lot of ground. If you could summarize, like, what would be the key benefits of having a Slate vehicle in my fleet? Like,
Yeah.
what are the top three or four or five things that you would think about that would benefit an architectural engineering or construction company?
Yeah. Well, we've talked about the kind of total cost of ownership. The
Mhm.
acquisition and the operating costs are lower. Set that aside. We've talked about the customization a lot as well, being, hey, let me build it exactly to my spec. I can easily change it and swap it over time. But this, Slate truck, although, smaller form factor than kind of your typical full size, it's built to be very durable. It's designed to really wear in, not wear out, is kind of the phrase
Yep.
that we use internally, where the body panels are scratch and dent resistant. They're easy to swap and keep it looking professional if it does get into, light fender bender. And the whole vehicle is sort of built in this modular way to keep it an asset that you can hold on to for a long time. And for consumers, pass it down to kids, and for fleets to keep it in the fleet or move it between different use cases over time. So just that versatility gives it so many different jobs it can play within a fleet, whether
Right.
it's a personnel carrier as an SUV, take off the SUV, turn it into a pickup, put a cap on it, turn it into a van. There's just a lot of different lives it can live over the
Hmm.
course of its time within a fleet. And so I think that sort of modularity and paying for exactly what you need and nothing you don't is really like the biggest sort of value proposition for fleets in general,
Hmm.
on top of the other sort of economic elements that we've already talked about.
Yeah, no, I agree. No, and I appreciate that too, because I think, our audience just really, I think they're very open to wanting to kind of see these kinds of solutions, but it's, like the key benefits. And again, I think the cost piece is important, right? Because again, just very, very focused on that overhead and what we're spending to do projects and the
Mm-hmm.
margin pressure, et cetera. So the less we can kind of focus on that and be able to kind of minimize that, I think that's great. One of the things that I look at from, from the benefit perspective, and kind of want to touch on really kind of two different aspects of this. One, you mentioned Indiana, like your manufacturing is in Indiana, which kind of makes me feel that you're going to avoid some of the tariffs, right? you know, um, I see that as a benefit too, right? So you're seeing a lot of people moving manufacturing back to the U.S. to avoid wherever you kind of land on the whole tariff thing. In terms of manufacturing and expanding, is Indiana the only place that you're looking at right now? Or are there other areas that other parts of the country that you're looking at expanding? And then the other thing was going around, if I ordered a vehicle, how's it delivered? Where do I get it? How do I pick it up? Like those are the kinds of things I want to think about. So from a manufacturing perspective, I'm assuming expansion is probably somewhere on the roadmap at some point, but tell us about vehicle delivery.
Yeah. So Indiana is our plant. We're in Warsaw, Indiana, which is about a little bit northwest of Fort Wayne, sort of in the northern Indiana area. It used to be a printing facility. They used to produce the J.C. Penney mail order catalogs there.
Oh, wow.
And unfortunately, over time, the demand for sort of print catalog declined with the rise of e-commerce, and
Yeah.
eventually, I think in 2023, the plant closed, which was really impactful for that community. So we're really excited to be able to take over that facility and breathe new life into it, and really bring what's going to be a very substantial economic impact back to the region. We're headquartered out of the Detroit area. We also have offices in California. So, for now, we're really focused on delivering the first product, getting to job one, building that plant out. Certainly, there's
Yeah.
long-term considerations for other products and plants, but really, we're laser focused on first things first.
Yeah.
Um, and then, a question around delivery. We will have, national logistics and delivery partners that will help facilitate that process. We are planning to be direct to consumer and having our own dealer licenses. So some unique elements to that, similar to
Mhm.
other sort of EV startup OEMs that will face similar considerations. But no big announcements yet today, but expect basically a delivery type experience to a place of business or a preferred upfitter or job site that you can receive delivery at, and that's how the vehicles will get delivered. Details of that are forthcoming.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm assuming the closer you kind of get to manufacturing launch and getting vehicles out there, that will be kind of communicated out, which I think is it's interesting, right? So that's order what you want, it gets built, shows up at your job site or your office. That I think that's the model I think most manufacturers would love to kind of get to. And it's, I guess being tech focused, first principles focused on that front end, you kind of eliminate some of the traditional bottlenecks of, you know, dealer markups and all these other things where you're just going back to direct to consumer,
Mm.
which, I think most people are wanting that now, right? Like, I just give me what I want, let me order what I want and kind of go from there. One thing that just kind of popped up because you were talking about the manufacturing in Indiana and then the headquarters in Detroit. Tell us a little bit about the senior staff over at Slate. What's their background? What was their motivation to kind of move forward with something? I probably should have had that one in my notes a little earlier on, but I want to circle back to that one. Tell us a little bit about the people that are working at Slate. Where they came. We heard a little bit about your background, but tell us a little bit about the smart people on the back end of this that's really kind of making this thing work.
Yeah, yeah, we're led by tech and industrial innovators that have been through both traditional OEM past experiences, but also successful EV startups as well.
Mhm.
Our CEO is Christine Barman, and she was a very senior product development executive at Fiat Chrysler for many years, amongst other sort of industrials and technology leadership roles before joining Slate. Ryan Green, CFO of Slate, past experience in autonomous vehicle companies, Rivian Automotive, et cetera. And Jeremy Snyder, previously from Tesla,
Yeah.
VinFast, and some other startup companies. So team has been through sort of new EV startup company launches and scaling and know the
Yeah.
pitfalls and know the challenges and are applying some of those lessons learned. But also we have sort of the discipline around the engineering, development, and manufacturing side from a very seasoned team that is both finding efficiencies and speed to market,
Mhm.
but balancing that with thoroughness and rigor. So it's a very
Yeah.
seasoned group as well. And then our founders are actually affiliated with Rebuild Manufacturing. So they're an industrials company based out of Massachusetts that has really been focused on reshoring and building the U.S. industrial base. And so the
Mhm.
founder of that and CEO are sort of the Slate founders as well, and have been really focused on U.S. manufacturing, U.S. production and capability. And that DNA is infused within Slate.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. And we appreciate the background. And it sounds like, you have a pretty talented team that's it's really kind of thought through, again, having gone through some of this in some form or fashion with other organizations, it's going to kind of really set you guys up for success, leading into product delivery. Personally, I sit there and I say to myself, man, it'd be kind of nice to get a EV, right? Little truck that you can scoot around town. The challenging part is that you don't want to spend 50 or $60,000 on a second car, for yard work and things like that. So even from a consumer's perspective, I find a product like this to be pretty appealing, to be able to run up to a Home Depot or do something around town without actually having to, invest a ton of money in a second type of car, which is good. So want to make sure that everyone online hears, if you have a question, just feel free to drop it into your preferred chat with whatever platform you're looking at. So if you're on the Catalyst platform, you can ask a question into the Q&A. If you are on LinkedIn, et cetera, you can also just use the mechanism that is in your interface to ask us any questions. We're getting to the top of the hour. This has been a really great conversation. Let's see if any questions come in. But is there anything that Drew, you kind of thinking about this? Is there anything that we haven't touched on that you think that we should know about either Slate or the EV fleet market that you think would be of interest to our audience?
We briefly mentioned this earlier, but certainly the economics and utility have been topics, but the safety of the Slate truck has also been a major priority for us, and it is
Hmm.
always a priority for fleet operators. Slate truck has not cut corners in any way on safety. In fact, we're
Hmm.
targeting, 5-star crash, IHS top safety pick in all categories, and
Yep.
really designing a very durable, very robust, and
Hmm.
safe vehicle with automatic emergency braking and backup cameras and
Hmm.
additional, driver assist tech that can be sort of added on. And
You're
so
right.
that's really important, is something that is one of those foundational needs that, unlike leather seats or creature comforts, like core vehicle safety is something that's been, basically at the very top of the list. Safety first is our
Hmm.
first motto internally, and so that applies to how we build our products and how we operate. And so wanted to make sure that point was clear as well. There's,
Hmm. Yeah.
sometimes there's a perception that, hey, the bigger the vehicle, the more safe it is, and that's really not true. It's really
Yeah.
about how the safety systems are built, the rigidity, the crash and crumple zones, the
Hmm.
low center of gravity of the Slate,
Right.
puts it in a very, very, very safe category. And so that's something that, fleet operators can feel good about.
Yeah. So interestingly enough, if you, for the audience out there, if you haven't been to the website, it's slate.auto, and head over to it. It's actually a really good looking truck. Kind of reminds me of an old school Bronco with the, kind of a newer flair, newer look to it, which I think it's kind of cool. I'm a big fan of the Bronco. Well, particularly the older ones, but I do like the styling on it. So yes, it's not only a safe and functional vehicle, but it's also actually aesthetically pleasing, in my opinion. So it's interesting in terms of I love the concept of the modularity of what you're thinking. I could see this expanding into being able to create like a mobile office, right? And having there's so many different applications that come across my mind that I think it's kind of cool. So we did have a question that did come in. You know, Drew, it's around higher payload and towing capacity. Is that something that Slate's considering? Obviously you have your go-to-market product where it is, and we asked about the off-road. But what's Slate's thoughts on a higher payload, higher? Obviously that has its other challenges.
Mhm.
But is that something that's at least being discussed internally?
Yeah, I mean, right now we're targeting about a 1,400-pound payload, which is, very similar to what you see in other kind of
Hmm.
mid-size pickup trucks. So we've benchmarked, similar product to kind of help tee up what those benchmarks should be. And
Hmm.
we're still finalizing the exact specs of the vehicle, and so call it within the next 6 months, before first delivery, we'll have those finalized specs that we can share,
Hmm.
but it'll be still in that general ballpark. As for
Yep.
towing, we're targeting 1,000-pound tow right now. So I know that
Hmm.
some folks are looking to tow heavy duty trailers and things like that. And like we talked about, that is a challenge for all EVs. Fact of the matter
Yeah.
is, the efficiency when you tow, is dramatically impacted. It can be half the range, even less than half the range if you're pulling a heavy trailer. And so, we did not over-index on towing capability for the Slate truck. There's a lot of challenges there, and in the interest of sort of economics and probably not being the go-to form factor for a heavy tow vehicle anyway, kind of decided, hey,
Hmm.
rather
Yeah.
than try to spend a lot of money to try to compete where we might not be as successful anyway, let's focus on the areas that we can be successful. So
Yeah.
there's opportunity in the future for sure. We're always looking
Mhm.
at new product, but for now, nothing new to share.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, and I want to encourage everyone too. A lot of this information, if you haven't had a chance, it is on their website again. It's the website is slate.auto. It's AUTO auto, which is one of those newer domains, but that's great. So if you are interested in vehicle specs and other details, that information is on their website. Another question came in: finished vehicle logistics. Drew, have you thought about the allocation for fleets? Any constraints? So the question is have you thought about allocation for fleets versus consumer? Do you have a quantified potential savings due to logistics, minimal transport, graphic? So it looks like from a bulk ordering perspective, are there discounts? Are you guys looking at pricing if someone comes in and orders 10 of the same vehicle from a logistics perspective, customizations perspective? Are there any incentives from a fleet perspective that Sleep may be offering?
Um, nothing specific that I can necessarily outline here yet. We're still sort of defining all of the, operational capabilities to deliver that, to understand what our costs are and if there's efficiencies there or not from bulk. So certainly, exploring that, but nothing to necessarily announce specifically here. But we do think our distribution model is going to be very efficient compared to the broader industry, and that ultimately, in some shape or form, passes through to the customer, ultimately having a
Yeah.
better total cost.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is interesting kind of going back to your pricing model to begin with, right? You're not um, that lower cost provider, right? It's kind of the minimalist approach, I think is going to be unique as well.
Mhm.
Had another question come in terms of from a graphics and customizations perspective, is it really just the wraps, or are there other painting options you guys are considering?
So the body panels are molding color plastic. So they are a composite material that's very stiff and rigid, but it's the solid slate gray color that you see on our website. The
Mm-hmm.
contours and the way that the panels are broken up and have sort of crease lines and coach lines in them are actually designed very specifically to receive wraps easily.
Mm-hmm.
And so rather than having a lot of complex curvatures that can often make it very difficult to apply a wrap because you require
Mm-hmm.
stretching and finessing and a lot of skilled labor to make it happen. These
Yeah.
simple curved panels, actually basically become like a peel and stick, type application with locating features, built right into the truck and into the kits. So
Yeah.
we are leaning into wrap. Certainly, you could paint the body panels. One could. We're not offering that as Slate, but we are offering a whole
That
variety
is
of
an expensive way to
colors.
do it, though. I would definitely lean into the wrap. One of the things that you start thinking about the wrap, because I'm kind of also looking at your website. Most of the wraps now also are protective, right? So they're
Mhm.
protecting the body in and of itself from rocks. So if you are on a job site, there's likely dust, dirt, rocks, things that are going to pop up. The wrap is a way more cost effective nature. Plus it's unlimited customizing, right? You can put your any kind of logo, graphics, et cetera. There was a
100%.
question that came in from a technology perspective. Are you using regenerative braking? So from a charging perspective, I know that you guys are kind of not thinking too tech heavy, but where are you guys falling on that kind of technology, the regenerative braking?
We have regenerative braking, yep, with one pedal drive feature where as you take your foot off the gas, the regenerative braking kicks on and starts to slow down the vehicle. And that's really key for getting the best efficiency out of the car.
Hmm.
So rather than expending heat and a traditional brake pad and rotor, using the motor to basically charge the battery back up. So we do have it, and it's toggleable. You can turn it off if someone's not comfortable, but by default it'll be on.
Yeah, if you've never driven an EV before, the regenerative braking is an interesting thing to get used to. Like you don't anticipate it, um, which is interesting. There was another question in here about times to charge. Again, this information is on their website, but at a level 2, it's pointing out what 4 to 8 hours for an 80% charge or a full charge.
Yeah, I believe that's for a full charge. It depends. We've got two different battery packs. We've got kind of a standard and extended, and then depends on the power that you have. For that level 2 charge, it can range significantly,
Mhm.
but even at the very
Yeah.
longest end, 8 hours is pretty typical for an EV, and a 4 hour
Yeah.
level 2 charge is rather fast. So Really you
Yeah.
think about that as sort of, replacing, what you consumed the day prior. So it's not even typical that someone's charging from 0 to 100% every day. They're charging from 25 to
Mhm.
80% or 35 or 40% to 80% each day.
Yeah, that's great. And then we got one more question before we hit the top of the hour. Do you have any early estimates on the annual total cost of ownership or cost per mile for the vehicle? And I'm assuming that, obviously it depends on what if I loaded it up at 1,200 pounds, it's obviously it's not going to be the same if it was empty. But do you have any estimates around that?
We've certainly done some internal benchmarking, nothing that we've like published yet per se. But certainly, when you think about the amortization of that upfront costs, typically, maintenance savings are, 50%, less than a typical gas vehicle. Charging expenses can be a quarter to half the cost of a gas vehicle. So, you start doing the math, and it's very, very, very competitive,
Mhm.
against not just, other EVs, but also against even certain used EVs, and affordable gas vehicles as well. So, that will come out in time as we get, more data, and actuals, on the vehicle when it hits the road. But
Mhm.
we expect
Yep.
it to be very, very competitive.
Great, great. So we're at the top of the hour. Drew, again, I appreciate this has been a great conversation. Again, this is not a topic that when we think about innovation in this industry, is something that we tend to talk a lot about. So it was great to have you on and kind of hear about what Slate's doing. Again, I would encourage everyone, if you are interested in learning more about this particular product, you can find them online at slate.auto. Want to thank Drew again for joining us today. The recordings of this will be available, I believe, on not only on LinkedIn, but on YouTube. And for the members that are part of Catalyst, you can also find the recording there. If you are not a member of Catalyst, please head over to kpready.co to learn more about how you can become a member and not miss out on any of these events that are going into the future. Drew, again, appreciate the time and thank you. And thank everyone that has joined us live, and look forward to our next session, I believe, in the next couple weeks. So look forward. If you want to hear more, just visit us online, and we'll be having some more great content around innovation and technology in the AEC space. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Frank.